I'm very pleased to be welcoming and introducing James Essinger today. He's going to speak to us about Ada Lovelace, and this is 2 days after Ada Lovelace Day, which is an annual celebration of inspiring women in science and technology, now in its 4th year.
James? Really sorry, I need to disappear for about 30 more minutes before I start. I'm really sorry. I do apologise. I'm sorry about this. I do apologise.
Well, I'll carry on.
Do you mind?
I can tap dance and everything.
Sorry. If I can set those. I do apologise.
Anyway, I'll carry on with the introduction and then James will get back and start the talk. So his new book about her, A Female Genius, has just been published and it's already been well reviewed in The Independent and on Sunday and the Sunday Express. James is a professional writer, principally business writing, articles, management reports and other business publications, but also fiction and non-fiction. And another book that he wrote is Jacquard's Web, which is how a handloom led to the birth of the information age. And it's an interesting, very easy to read history and includes stories about the remarkable characters who contributed to the development of the computer. With the intriguing idea that the computer age could have started nearly 2 centuries ago if more notice had been taken of Ada Lovelace, but then she was just a woman in Victorian times. I'm going to leave it to James to introduce and tell you all about her. And he's going to be happy to take questions and comments afterwards. And he says he'll be back in a minute. And if he isn't, Kevin will stand in.
I know for a fact Roger has an emergency lecture. Does anybody know why Ada Lovelace Day jumps around? I'm not related to anything in Ada's life.
Say again, Terry.
The Ada Lovelace Day 2 days ago, I don't think it's a fixed point in the calendar. I think it's a different day every year. It's certainly been on various dates so far. It's nothing to do with Ada's actual birth, death or marriage, as far as I understand. There's a pending question.
Right. Don't know.
We count December the 10th as Ada Day.
It's quite an excuse for quite a few parties and events around the country.
Yes, I think that's the point.
And
Just adjacent.
You're on microphone.
While I'm waiting for the next week's story, you can put in the paper says it's the back end that the website says
It's going to be the Thursday the 21st of November,
Yeah.
and it's going to be about the Heinz Nixdorf Museum in Paderborn.
Oh, that's not the website says, so this is
In that case, yes.
Sorry, Rachel.
Right.
Really with yours.
The answer to your question, Terry, is the person who decided there should be
Okay,
this
so
update,
the one-
they decide what day it is. Yes.
Okay,
You can also make take a decision.
thanks for the introduction. I'm sure it was really good. Now, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, well, I apologise for the moments of last minute nerves. But Doran's here, and Doran is is a mentor. He gets the acknowledgement. He shares that acknowledgement of the book. I first met Doran back in about 1997, when I knew nothing about Ada. I perhaps I don't know very much now, but I know more than I did then. I think it's for me, it's a huge honour to talk to you people. What's great about this event is it wasn't cancelled. On Tuesday, I was asked by my publisher. I live in Canterbury, which is it's about 60 miles from London, as you know, to talk on the ITV News in the evening. I was quite excited, obviously very excited about that. I came to London on the train, naively thinking it would happen. I got to ITV Studios, 200 Gray's Inn Road, and it had been cancelled. And the publisher is a great common publisher, so they told me about 45 minutes ago. Well, I don't know if you've travelled on the high-speed train from Canterbury to London, but believe me, even if they got the message to me during the journey, you can't tell the driver, or I should say almost the pilot, it's so fast. You can't tell the driver just, sorry, can you turn around, okay? And also the train goes through lots of tunnels and a lot of it's underground. And anyway, it was a big disappointment, but on the other hand, I did do a radio interview then. Also, I got a taste of what it's like to be briefly a minor celebrity. It's full of disappointments. Let's cut to the chase. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands about who, if anyone here thinks that Ada Lovelace was as mad as a hatter. But we must remember that Bruce Collier said that in his otherwise very good book in about 1990. Writing the book about Ada with such knowledge of Ada as I have, which of course is limited by one fact that I'm a man, and I'm not being facetious, but also by the fact that the scholarly record is not that extensive. If you read the letters from Babbage to Ada and vice versa, could fill a booklet of about 150 pages. If you read that and a few of the books, you're practically an expert in Ada. I have a big sense of responsibility. I think about the moment about where she is at the moment. She's lying next to her father in a dark tomb that's not been opened since 1929 in the church in the village of Hucknall. And this is perhaps the most august body I'm going to be addressing about Ada, probably very likely ever. And it's a big responsibility. Many of you probably know more about Ada than I do. Many of you have had careers in computing which I've not. I have written quite a lot of articles about computing, but I've not really had that. What I have is a love for her and her work, a love for the 19th century, and a fascination with Charles Babbage's work. And I want to just try and, in this talk, to try and share some of that enthusiasm with you. I think, in some ways, there's a very personal start to my story, because, as many of you will know, in 1828, Ada lived in a house called, I'm not sure whether you should say Biffrons or Bifrons. In those days, that was quite a common name for a house that had got two major fronts on either side of the door. A house called, let's call it Bifrons, which was near a village called Patricksbourne in Canterbury. And I actually start my book by talking about that. On the outskirts of Patricksbourne today, which is quite near my home, I live in Canterbury, I could walk to Patricksbourne in about 1.5 hours. There's a muddy lane which leads towards a large field with two amazing rows of Wellingtonia trees. And the trees once bordered this driveway of this house, Bifrons. It was demolished after the Second World War. Many houses, many stately homes, as you know, with the Second World War were used as barracks. I'm not sure it was, but I think it may have been. And they were then demolished afterwards. Now, the house is gone. You can still apparently see the cellars if you know where to look. But what has survived is a bridge. If ever you're near Canterbury and you wanted to drive, you can drive between the villages of Patricksbourne and Bridge. You can see the bridge. That's not why bridge is called bridge, there's another bridge, but you can see this bridge. It's about 150 yards from the road. It's in a private property, it's on a private field, so although I've been to see it, I don't recommend that, but well, it's perfectly safe to do, but it's an amazing bridge. It's made of stone and wood, and it was built in the 18th century, that is known. So it's almost certain that Ada once stood there. And what I find fascinating is that she went there in 1828, and her mother, Lady Byron, was often on rest cures. Let me give you a brief summary of her life. Ada was born on December the 10th, 1815. So her bicentenary is coming up. She was the daughter of Lord Byron and his wife Annabella, Lady Byron, who were married for about a year. And then Lady Byron left Byron because he was unfaithful to her. They never had any money because although Annabella's parents were very wealthy, they seem unwilling to have given the dowry to the Byrons when the Byrons. They never had any money, and the whole relationship was a complete nightmare. There obviously were a few moments of harmony, e.g. when Ada was conceived. But Byron was clearly unfaithful to his wife, not just with an actress, but also with an actress he was unfaithful to, but also he had a relationship with his half-sister, Augusta. Now, she wasn't a uterine half-sister. I won't go into details of what that means, I'm sure we know what that means. In those days, incest with a non-uterine sibling was regarded as not as bad as with a uterine one. It's all really gross, but Byron and Augusta were in love, and Ada was born in these awful circumstances. When she was about 5 weeks old, Annabella left Byron, taking Ada with her. Ada never saw Byron again. This is a very important point. It's not as if they had a friendly meeting, never saw him again. And as much as she'd never seen him again when she was only 5 weeks old when he cleared off. So we can assume that Byron had cuddled her, cradled her in his arms. We can assume that's the case. But basically, but that was it. And initially, the relationship between Byron and Lady Byron was quite harmonious. Although she left him, they exchanged friendly letters, but then she told her parents what had happened. At that time, her parents were living in Kirkby Manor in Leicestershire, and from then on, she was at loggerheads with Byron. So all her life, Lady Byron never remarried. She basically felt betrayed by her husband. I mean, as a writer myself, though I hasten to add of a far more humble status than Lord Byron, we writers are a funny bunch. I mean, our supreme loyalty, ultimately, is probably to our work. Don't get me wrong, I mean, the way Byron behaved towards his wife, I think, was appalling, but in a horrible way, I can kind of understand why he behaved like that, because ultimately, he never wanted to get married anyway. It was a terrible mistake. The whole relationship was bizarre. They actually hardly saw each other for about 18 months before the marriage. It was almost like they met on some sort of, almost like people meet on internet dating and correspond, but they don't actually see each other for a long time. It was a disastrous marriage. But Ada was born out of this. Ada was, I think, astonishing from the beginning. She wasn't a great mathematician. I mean, there was a whole book by Dorothy Stein to prove that. I mean, she wasn't a great mathematician. She wasn't a great scientist. She was, the reason I'm standing here at all is because, well, partly because I'm interested, also because I've written this book. What I think is incontestable, in my view, it's just my opinion, is that she had certain insights into the computer, which I would argue not even Babbage had. I'm not an expert in Babbage. Doran is. There are probably some other experts in Babbage here. But there's something in Anthony Hyman's biography of Babbage, I think a very interesting remark near the end of the biography, where he says that something like, he points out that Babbage's intellectual roots were actually in the 18th century. This is the thing to remember, isn't it? Babbage was born in 1791. It's not that long ago. The whole thing is not that long ago. If you tell young kids today about 1830, they think, well, when is this? But to try and relate it to the modern time, I used to be friends with a chap called Cedric Dickens, who died about 10 years ago. I met him when he was an old man in his 80s. As you may know, he was a great enthusiast for Dickens' work and a great cricketer, wonderful gentleman. I don't know exactly when he died. I think he died about 10 years ago. Now, Cedric Dickens was the grandson of Henry Fielding Dickens, Dickens' son. So we can be sure that Cedric spoke to Henry Fielding Dickens. Henry Fielding Dickens was the Dickens who was the most successful Dickens child. He became Recorder of London, which has nothing to do with tapes. It's about, it's not a very good joke, it's a leader role, of course. And he died in 1929, but we can assume that Cedric spoke to his grandfather. And of course, Henry Fielding would have spoken to Dickens. So I've spoken to someone who spoke to someone who spoke to Dickens, and that's true. And because Dickens and Ada knew each other, only one more remove, you've got to, and of course Dickens knew Babbage, obviously, as well. So you're not only about 5 removes from Ada, so you're all, if any of you knew Cedric yourself, you're all no more than 6 removes from Ada. It wasn't that long ago, okay, she died 105 years before I was born. It's not really that long ago in the great scheme of things, is it? Now, I want to actually, I think, because I'm addressing such an august body, I think it's important to actually look at the minute details of the claim to her being a female genius. And I'm going to do that in a moment. But I want to just talk a little bit about, speculatively perhaps, about Byron and Ada. I would have loved to have met them all. I would love to have met Byron and Dickens and Babbage and Ada. Byron is in some ways a character we can perhaps almost get to know best of all. He was quite, he seems to have been, no disrespect to you, George, but he seems to have been quite amoral in his attitude. I mean, as you may know, when he left England on April 25th, 1816, which was 3 months and 10 days after Annabella had left him, he travelled down from London to Dover in a sumptuous gilded coach, which cost about £500 at the time. One of the areas which my publisher and I differ a little bit is the modern equivalent to this money. It's very hard to do, because actually, if you use the basis of about 50 times, the coach would have cost £12,500, is that right? £500, yes. And, sorry, I'm wrong, £25,000, I'm so sorry. But that's not really right. My publisher gives the equivalent of about £500,000. I don't believe that's entirely accurate, but all the same, because of the way society was in those days, the rich were fabulously rich. However, Byron never actually paid for this carriage. And even after his death, 8 years later, there's still no evidence it was actually paid for. And it was like a scene from almost like a British film comedy. I mean, he was dashing down to Dover with his friends to escape the bailiffs. But he had time to briefly stop at Canterbury. You can always imagine saying, "Come on, Joy, let's go." No, let's look at the cathedral for an hour or so. He stopped at Canterbury briefly. Then he got into a boat and crossed the channel. Now that particular night, there was a terrible storm in the channel, and they sailed from Dover to Ostend. Now it should normally have taken about 8 hours the journey. Of course, it was a sailing ship. I hardly need to mention that. A sailing ship, but it took about 16 hours, and he was seasick, and it was just a dreadful journey. I can't even begin to imagine what it was like. But he wrote a sort of famous stanza, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of, about Ada, when he was actually crossing the channel, which it goes like this. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's worth reading again. "Is thy face like thy mother's, my fair child, Ada, sole daughter of my house and heart? When last I saw thy young blue eyes, they smiled, and then we parted, not as now we part, but with a hope. Awaking with a start, the waters lift around me, and on high the winds lift up their voices." Sorry, the waters heave around me, and on high the winds lift up their voices. I depart, whither I know not, but the hours gone by, when Albion's lessening shores could grieve or glad mine eye. I love that in the middle, that sort of break in the middle, and suddenly, almost if you actually woken up by the wind. It's amazing. But it's significant. It starts talking about Ada, then he forgets about it. By the way, he's kind of forgotten about it. He's talking about Albion and his sense of leaving his country. I mean, as George Orwell pointed out, we only talk about Albion in very exalted moments. Like John Keats' famous sonnet about reading King Lear again. He talks about Albion there. What did Byron do when he got to Ostend? Did he sit mournfully over a glass of absinthe, thinking about his daughter and his wife? And actually, he didn't do that. What he did was he seduced the chambermaid of the hotel he checked in at. Now, don't get me wrong, it's very important. I mean, from what I know of Byron, again, I'm almost rather humble in this gathering, it seems that he was rather bipolar or manic depressive. He seems to view sex as a kind of an aesthetic rather than as a supreme delight. Although when he met Teresa Guiccioli later in life, he seems to be more in love with her. But anyway, you get this extraordinary sense of this woman, of Ada, being born from this situation, this terrible marriage, this poet. So what was the deal with Ada exactly? What kind of person was she? Well, from what I can see from my research, her mother was, you could almost say, paranoid that Ada would become as wild and erratic as Byron was. And so one of the reasons that Annabella wanted Ada to become a mathematician, or at least train in that way, is to try and, there seems evidence she really wanted to control Ada's imagination. Now, it's very important to bear in mind, because after all, Ada in some ways was rather a sad case. She never really fulfilled herself. She died of 36 from uterine cancer. She had a dreadful death. Anybody who thinks the good old days of the 19th century should think again. A few years ago, David Starkey, who lives, I don't like name dropping, I apologize, but David Starkey, who has got a home in Byron near Canterbury, he was talking at a little village hall there. You know that joke about name dropping? I hate name droppers, and the Queen agrees with me. Sorry. Sorry. I asked David Starkey, he was talking about the Tudors, a marvellous talk about Henry VIII, and afterwards when he was writing his books, I said, what is the difference between the modern age and the past? Because I think getting into the mindset of the past, it's such an interesting, possibly impossible thing. He thought about it, he said, pain. He said, pain. I think it's actually a very important point. Thank goodness we live in a time, if we have a headache, we can pop to a pharmacist and get some paracetamol. And I know that people have medical problems today, and they can be very painful and unpleasant, but we have fantastic medical treatment. It's very difficult to imagine the comparison. It wasn't that long ago, really, was it? I mean, I don't know much about medicine, but I think possibly if Ada could have had a hysterectomy, she would have lived, she would have probably survived. I don't know, but I think so. But she did, in those days, they didn't even have, you couldn't even inject drugs into the body, they had to be taken orally, so it wasn't as effective. So she had a very painful life. She was often ill. But she was a very privileged lady. Her mother, although during the marriage, Lady Byron was very poor, her mother eventually inherited a huge amount of money from a number of sources. She inherited Lord Wentworth's estate. Believe it or not, it took 10 years in those days for probate to be proved. She became very wealthy. So Lady Byron could educate Ada as she wanted. And she did give her a great education. I mean, in the Ada story, Lady Byron is often portrayed as rather a bit of an ogress. But she seems to be rather shy, and perhaps not that good at getting on with people, but she gave her daughter a good education. But she did very much suppressed some aspects of Ada. And there are many stories about, for example, about Ada saying to her mother, "I've got a lovely voice, my mother," when she was a young girl. And Lady Byron saying, "Ada, did you give yourself your voice?" You know, as if to say, don't fish for compliments, you know. And as far as Ada and Lord Byron are concerned, Lord Byron did get messages to Ada after he went into exile. Get messages to Lady Byron, I should say, to ask after Ada. They normally came through via Augusta. For example, Lord Byron asked for a miniature of Ada, which he got. Lady Byron sent him a miniature of Ada, and also sent him some of Ada's hair. So he did kind of have contact with her. But again, writing the book and researching and writing it, he kind of annoys me at many levels, Lord Byron. I think he's a brilliant poet. But I think as a man, I think he was emotionally very unreliable. I think he had, as you probably know, he had a daughter. He had a daughter called Allegra, an illegitimate daughter, with one of Shelley's friends. And he did not look after Allegra. She was brought up in Italy, and she died when she was only 5 in a convent. She was looked after in the convent, but he hardly ever went to see her. And he referred to her as his bastard in letters to friends. Although in all fairness to Byron, that was actually, in those days, was not such a negative term as it is today. So it's not really clear that if Byron had actually had more hand in bringing up Ada, she'd have been happy or healthy. She may not have been. And it's interesting that Lady Byron did not let Ada go abroad, did not take Ada on her grand tour until after Byron was dead. And so anyway, so you get this kind of picture of this young woman being brought up in a lot of privilege. By the time she met Babbage on June the 5th, 1833, she was 17 then. Because she was born December the 10th, she always seems a year younger than she actually should be. She'd met the Queen, been presented to the court, met the King and Queen. And we had this astonishing meeting between Babbage and Ada in 1833, June the 5th. We know the day. Much as we'd love to know what they talked about, we don't know. I mean, we don't know at the moment. If something crops up, no problem, that can happen. But also, we don't know even where the party was. It's not even known where it was. It was in London, we don't know whose party it was. But they met, and clearly they got on very well. And Lady Byron wrote to a friend they got on very well, I'm paraphrasing. And about 2 weeks later, Babbage invited Lady Byron and Ada, and I think a couple of other people as well, to go to his home on 1 Dorset Street in Marylebone. But you can still... The house has sadly been demolished. That amazing terrace on Dorset Street is all there apart from Babbage's house, sadly. But yeah, you can easily find it. And they went there and saw what Babbage had done of the difference engine. It's very important that the man who built the difference engine is in this room. Okay? It wasn't Babbage. He's in this room. Okay? Babbage built about 1/7 of it, and it's a marvellous achievement, but he only built 1/7 of it. And what they saw was that. And Ada called it Ada, I must be careful what I say here, Ada is believed to have called it the thinking machine. Or at least there's evidence that Lady Byron, that's what how Ada saw it. She became fascinated with it. So in the next 10 years, she and Babbage were friends. I mean, Ada got married a couple of years later. I mean, in some ways when I began the research, I was hoping to find out more about the relationship between Babbage and Ada. All that can responsibly be said, and responsibly is very, very important in this scholarly world, is that they were close friends for some of the time. And they may have had a kind of slightly romantic friendship. Ada, there's often some flirtatious letters. There's one letter which was lost, but Ada refers to it, where Ada says to Babbage, Ada refers to Babbage saying, "Why does my friend prefer imaginary routes for our friendship?" What a strange thing. So Babbage said to Ada, in a letter, why does my friend prefer imaginary routes for our friendship? I don't know what he means by that, but Ada answers in the letter which has survived, saying that because she's got some of that imagination you would not like her to possess. You get the sense that perhaps Babbage was a bit resentful of Ada's imagination, and you can imagine conversations between them where she was talking about his machines in a very imaginative kind of way, and perhaps he didn't really like that very much. I mean, my personal view, which is not a view you need to share, it's perhaps odd or not, I can't prove it, is that I think Ada was very fond of Babbage, but I think Babbage was very, very curtailed and strict in how he saw his emotional life. He seems to have mourned his wife Georgiana, who died in 1827, for the rest of his life after she died. He never got married again. There is this peculiar letter in the British Library in the manuscript section of Babbage, where a friend went to the West Country to try and meet a woman who Babbage thought might be a suitable new wife, but it didn't come to anything. I think Babbage was very fond of her, but I can imagine that he was very repressed in that area of his life. There is a fascinating letter later in their relationship where Babbage refers to reading and some advertisements in the Times. Now, in the days before the internet and before the phone and before the mobile, when husbands, I'm not going to make light of this, it's actually quite tragic, when husbands left the family nest and just cleared off, their wives could not easily trace them. So it was quite common for wives to put advertisements in the Times saying something like, I use my initials to avoid any offence, if J.E. will return to the family home, all will be forgotten and forgiven, or words to that effect. I'm not by myself, so I'm not, that's just an example. And Babbage was reading that. You can imagine him reading it in a rather melancholy way, perhaps over dinner or in his study. And he wrote to Ada a letter in which he referred to reading this. He said, I've been reading I'm paraphrasing this, it's not literal, I'm paraphrasing it, but I've been reading the advertisements placed by wives in search of their wandering lords. And he then goes on to say that he's got no one who cares about him in that way. It's kind of rather sad. And I think people who think that Babbage was just purely a mechanical kind of person are really wrong. I mean, he clearly had an emotional life which was probably quite lonely and quite suppressed. And after he dedicated his autobiography in a misquotation, he actually, not the dedication, but he does a motto. He talks about the importance of womankind, misquoting from a Byron poem. Anyway, so they had this friendship, and in 1843, the friendship, I shouldn't say blossomed, because I think it was quite a good friendship, but they worked together, as we all know, they did some collaborative work, and that is the basis for Ada's reputation. So I want to go and look at this in a bit more detail there. And I don't really like sitting down, it's a bit sort of remote sitting down, isn't it? When it's on the table, it might break the table. But a few hypotheses. It is a simple numerical fact that most of the letters that survive between Babbage and Ada and vice versa are from 1843. Now, of course, letters that Babbage wrote to Ada would have been in Ada's family's possession after Ada's death. And Lady Byron may have destroyed them. I think she probably would have destroyed some of them, but she didn't destroy all of them. There were clearly some that survived. It seems possible that she was quite proud of Ada's work in 1843 and was less willing to destroy letters from Babbage to Ada during that period. There are still letters from Babbage in other periods, but most of them from 1843. The famous letter in which Babbage talks about the Enchantress of Number, although what that means is another matter, but of course letters from Ada to Babbage went into his collection, and there's no particular reason to think he would have destroyed any of them. He probably cherished them. And it's the fact that most of the letters from Ada to Babbage are also 1843, which suggests that probably the truth of the matter is that that was when their friendship was most active. Now, it's very important, I'm very careful what I say next, because I'm not here to make any sort of spurious claims. I'm not here to indulge in fantasy about a woman's intelligence or about a role model, but let's look at the facts seem to be this. And there's no reason, I think, to disbelieve what Babbage says in his autobiography. Babbage was not a liar. I mean, he was an inveterate self-publicist, which you can't blame him for being that. He was doing his best to get money for his engines. He says in his autobiography that the suggestion for writing some additional material to the translation of Menabre's article about the analytical engine was actually a suggestion he made to Ada. And I think there's no reason to disbelieve that. But what I find fascinating is that despite her family cares, despite the fact that her husband was, may rest in peace, probably a bit of a schmuck, a good-looking guy, but he built tunnels, he didn't do a great deal with his life. And there's some amazing letters that were discovered in Newcastle, in the north, about 13 years ago, in which she actually writes, she tells Babbage off for trying to dissuade her husband from getting a job, because you get fed up with him having it in that around the house all the time. Basically, what happened is that Ada translated Menabre's article and then wrote about 20,000 additional words. Now, of course, Bruce Collier's claim that she was as mad as a hatter ultimately can only be substantiated if the truth of the matter is that Babbage wrote all the notes and pretended that Ada wrote them. There is, in my opinion, no evidence whatsoever that was the case. There is no evidence at all. First of all, linguistically, the style of the notes, particularly the narrative type, the narrative parts of the notes, is not like Babbage's style in his own writing. It is a more feminine tone. There's also historical evidence that basically, there's loads of evidence that Ada was writing them, was sending them to Babbage for comment, but was actually the kind of dominant party in the whole situation. Let's now look at some of the actual things she said. Because I think it's only when we do that we can actually, I don't even want to run on too long, but it's only when we really do that we can actually evaluate what Ada's contribution was. Because ultimately, this afternoon, we're in a kind of laboratory to actually find out what the truth was of her contribution to the history of the computer. Okay. Now, there's lots of collaborative material. Well, let me bring my chair out here. I can't bear sitting behind a table, I'm sorry. It's like being a school teacher. Yeah. Nothing wrong being a school teacher. I just mean that I don't want to sort of, you're all, most of you, sorry?
They're on strike today.
Oh, they're really? Well, they're not. They're more working. You're mostly more experienced than me, sorry. Basically, Babbage says, for example, we discussed together the various illustrations that might be introduced. I suggested several, but the selection was entirely her own. So also was the algebraic working out the different problems, except indeed that related to the numbers of Bernoulli, which I'd offered to do to save Lady Lovelace the trouble. This she sent back to me for an amendment, having detected a grave mistake which I'd made in the process. So in Babbage's autobiography, he's at pains to emphasise that Ada was in charge of the whole work. He's at pains to emphasise that. You could say, well, he wanted to do that because he wanted to bring her celebrity into the work, but I don't think that's the case. He wrote then to say that the notes of the Countess of Lovelace extend to about 3 times the length of the original memoir. Their authors entered fully into almost all the very difficult and abstract questions connected with the subject. And by the way, if you're wondering whether he mentions Ada any more in the autobiography, he doesn't. But it's not really, it's hardly a kind of personal and emotional revelation autobiography. It's quite, well, it's written by really quite old guys, really. He comes across as being a rather crotchety man. And he says, he doesn't even mention his wife directly. He mentions her obliquely, because he went about being in Turin and how he was kind of in mourning a bit. And somebody said in mourning, there's an oblique mention. But, okay, now, Babbage goes on. The 2 memoirs, he means Menabre's essay and then Ada's, taken together furnish to those who are capable of understanding the reasoning a complete demonstration that the whole of developments and operations of analysis are now capable of being executed by machinery. So that's how Babbage saw it. However, are we entitled to go a bit deeper? Are we entitled to go a bit deeper? I will in a moment. Before I do, I want to just mention that in 1842, the year before this was written, the notes were written, Babbage had a disastrous meeting with Robert Peel, the Prime Minister, where he basically gone to ask him for more money. And Peel clearly took the line. You can actually, you can actually reconstruct the conversation almost with a dialogue as well. That Babbage had £17,000 for building the difference engine, but had never delivered one. And Babbage replied to that he hadn't delivered it because he thought of a better machine. And he spent a lot of time in the meeting with Robert Peel, moaning really about the way things were, and saying that the public seemed very biased against him, and that and Peel basically said, you're too sensitive to such attacks, Mr. Babbage. Men of sense never care for them. And that Babbage was moaning about not having been given preferment. But above all, Robert Peel was not willing to consider the matter of giving Babbage any more money. And it's a very heartbreaking scene because in it, Babbage actually said to Peel prophetically that the future history will look at this meeting and it will consider it very, very important. So, and Peel himself said that he was exhausted before, he wrote to his wife he was exhausted before the meeting, he didn't want to meet Babbage really at all particularly. You see, I'm going to go on to the Ada Lovelace again in a minute, but I think one thing we have to try and do, looking at the period is this, we have to try and imagine our way back into it. 1842. What was it like technologically? Well, of course there were steam engines. Of course there were steam carriages, there were factories doing all sorts of exciting things. And there was the beginning, gradually, of the precision industry. The precision tools were gradually being made, although of course they wouldn't be made probably for another 20 or 30 years. But I mean, the first half of the 19th century was technologically, I must be careful what I say, but really quite very backward compared with us. Babbage was working in a vacuum. He was making this machine in a vacuum. I mean, there's no doubt, I'm not for a moment doubting that Babbage was an incredible genius. He was clearly a greater genius than Ada. That goes without saying, in my opinion. But the book's called A Female Genius. Actually, it wasn't my title, it was actually I called it Ada's Thinking Machine. I published one to the title, A Female Genius, because of what Ada's insights were that were beyond Babbage's. But all the same, let's just try and think about life in those days. I mean, it was not a technological age. The idea that information could be kind of controlled in a way that we control it today, that we can become masters of information. The idea that we have to actually spend our lives selecting what information we apply ourselves to, because otherwise we'd never get anything done. It's an age that is very difficult to relate to nowadays. I mean, you read the novels. I mean, look at Dickens's novels, how incredibly untechnological they are. I mean, incredibly so. He mentions this character Daniel Doyce in Little Dorrit, which may be based on Babbage, and how Daniel Doyce invented this invention for the benefit of his people, his countrymen, but no one was interested. It's an incredibly untechnological age. I mean, it's true that Dickens is something a bad example, because Dickens died in 1870, and during his lifetime, there are certain things happened that have helped to change the modern world. For example, the Atlantic telegraph cables were laid in the 1860s. There's no mention of that in Dickens' work. But all the same, it's an incredibly untechnological age. The reason I'm saying this is to help us the next and final stage of my talk, which is to look at what actually Ada was actually saying. Because I think to give her credit, she like Babbage was working in a vacuum. We do not know, even though I have no doubt at all that the notes were written by Ada. We don't know how much of it was prompted by Babbage. We don't know that. But it seems clear to me that many of her insights, they don't appear anywhere else in Babbage's work. And it seems likely that they were insights she had. Now, let's come on to that now, as the final part of my talk. Clearly there's no real substitute for actually reading the notes oneself. They're available on the internet now. They're readily available. I think if you just type in Ada Lovelace plus notes, they'll come up. But let's see what she actually said. Okay. There's so much amazing meat. Let's start with a bit here. In studying the action of the analytical engine, we find that the peculiar and independent nature of the considerations which, in all mathematical analysis, belong to operations, as distinguished from the objects operated on, and for the results of the operations performed upon those objects is very strikingly defined and separated. So clearly, this notion of the machine having its own capacity for doing certain tasks is a kind of corollary, isn't there? There was an important corollary really was with the Jacquard loom, which is a machine that both Babbage and Ada found fascinating. Now, I've written a book about Jacquard loom called Jacquard's Web, and I've been to Lyon and seen Jacquard looms in operation. And the amazing thing about them was that Ada and Babbage both saw that the loom, before it was like programmed with a particular set of punched cards to weave a particular pattern, was kind of in a neutral sort of position. Now, they didn't use the word program. Babbage used the word made special. And that was the kind of closest they got to the idea of program, to being programmed. But that's what they meant. I mean, it's interesting in Lyon. And of course, nowadays, Jacquard looms use electronics. It's different. But in the old days, it took about a month for them to be for the cards to be set up. Now, Ada's insight into Babbage's work came through the Jacquard loom, and she realised that that the analytical engine could be far more than just a calculator. Babbage appears, again, I'm being a bit cagey here, but Babbage, I'm being cagey because we might find tomorrow a letter appears which Babbage says other things, but Babbage appears to have thought of the analytical engine as essentially a machine for effecting calculations. Now, we all know that it was an incredibly brilliant invention. We all know that it anticipated the computer in all sorts of ways. It's absolutely breathtaking. But Doran did an amazing job on talking about the analytical engine back in May, and I'm not going to tread onto his territory. But Ada says this. She says of the analytical engine, the operating mechanism can even be thrown into action independently of any object to operate upon, although of course no result could then be developed. Again, it might act upon other things beside number. I'll repeat that. It might act on other things beside number. Were objects found whose mutual fundamental relations could be expressed by those of the abstract science of operations, and which should be also susceptible of adaptations to the action of the operating notation and mechanism of the engine. Then she goes on. Supposing, for instance, that the fundamental relations of pitched sounds in the science of harmony and of musical composition were susceptible of such expression and adaptations, the engine might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. Now, there's some more read from a minute, but let's be clear about what's going on here. If it is true that it was only Ada who had the insight to see the analytical engine could be more than just a brilliant calculator, if that is true, and it may well be true, then you could argue unequivocally, I can't prove a negative. There could have been a genius in Papua New Guinea who saw this, but there is evidence there that Ada was the only person in the 19th century who foresaw what a computer is today. I mean, we all know that what computers really do is simply manipulate digital numbers, but most young kids don't know. Most kids don't know this. We have these incredible tools. They don't know that what's really happening is binary digits being manipulated. As far as they're concerned, the computers are just controlling everything, really. But Ada went beyond this. That's just a sample of what she said. I mean, it's just, as I say, it's just breathtaking. The distinctive characteristic of the analytical engine is the introduction into it of the principle which Jacquard devised for regulating, by means of punched cards, the most complicated patterns in the fabrication of brocaded stuffs. That's of course true, and of course stuffs of course means fabrics. But that was of course Babbage's idea, not Ada's. Babbage was the one who thought of bringing the punched cards to the Jacquard loom. Then she goes on. The bounds of arithmetic were, however, outstepped the moment the idea of applying the cards had occurred, and the analytical engine does not occupy common ground with mere calculating machines. It holds a position wholly its own, and the considerations it suggests are most interesting in their nature. In enabling mechanism to combine together general symbols in successions of unlimited variety and extent, a uniting link is established between the operations of matter and the abstract mental processes of the most abstract branch of mathematical science. That's an amazing paragraph. What I think she's saying there, basically, is that once this machine's working properly, Loads of things can be controlled by it. It can, not just mathematics. I think that seems pretty straightforward. And she talks about this being the potential of the machine. And she goes on to really argue, really pretty conclusively, that the machine can be used to do anything. And of course, in a famous sentence where she actually compares the action of the analytical engine in controlling algebraic processes to the action of the Jacquard loom in controlling in weaving flowers and leaves. I mean, all these points she makes, are very much what computers do today. And she says, for example, the analytical engine has no pretensions whatsoever to originate anything. It can do whatever we know how to order it to perform. It can follow analysis, but it has no power of anticipating any analytical relations or truths. Its province is to assist us in making available what we are already acquainted with. Let's read that sentence again. It's an amazing sentence. Its province is to assist us in making available what we are already acquainted with. Now, friends, when you see that sentence written by Ada in 1843, 9 years before her death, she really is like a voice crying out in the wilderness. If you went to Dickens or any of the great celebrities of the 19th century and said, all this information in libraries, in your books, all the information we know about our friends, about your families, it could all be contained in a machine and then given back to you with a speed that suits your needs and in a form that you can readily understand. And that latter part, of course, is to summarise the whole idea of the user interface. Because, of course, after all, computers tend to operate at a microscopic level. We need interfaces. But basically, she's having insights into the future, which, of course, no one paid any attention to. I mean, we talk about H.G. Wells, who was, of course, an amazing visionary, but she had insights into the future of information that were just not, that nobody else had. And, I mean, I just do not believe this is all prompted by Babbage. I mean, ultimately, I cannot prove that to you. I cannot prove it with the logic of pure, beyond any doubt whatsoever. They could have had conversations. And the fact that Babbage doesn't mention anywhere else, which is of course the point Doran makes at the end of the Cogwheel Brain, which is true, but maybe he just didn't mention, maybe he didn't think it was that maybe ultimately he didn't think it was that important. Maybe he did mention this to Ada, but he still thought of the analytical engine as primarily a calculating tool. And he thought that her ideas about it were not that interesting, not that important. Now, those ideas came from what she called poetical science. She described her thinking as poetical science. She wasn't a poet. She didn't seem to even like Lord Byron's poems, but poetical science seems to mean she brought imagination and flights of fancy into science. Now, that's what happened intellectually. Again, this short talk is no substitute for actually reading the notes. They're just amazing. Now, but the story's not finished yet. It's not finished yet. Because that same year, 1843, about the same time when they were working, Ada wrote Babbage a long letter, about 2,000 words long, full of her usual emphasised words. She loved emphasising words, underlining words, and they're normally reproduced with italics, in which she basically said, in effect, so this is a slight modern paraphrasing, look mate, you're a brilliant guy, but you're not able to influence the people you need to influence to get your money. I've never had the privilege of meeting Nathan Murthel, but there is a video of him on YouTube, or at least there was, where he says Babbage could not run a large project, which in some ways I think is, with respect to Babbage is probably a reasonable point. That Ada sensed that to build the analytical engine, to get it done, was a major project that would need the help of all sorts of influential people. I mean, the money was in the country, the money was there. And of course, the question of whether the analytical engine plans Babbage left are enough to build it is beyond my scope, in an area that I know Doran's very heavily involved in. What is known, of course, is that the plans Babbage left to build difference engine number 2 were enough, using Victorian standards of precision, to build the machine. Because Doran and his team did that. But Ada, whether or not the plans he left to build the hydrogen engine were actually good enough to build the machine is a matter that perhaps remains to be seen. But Ada knew that he couldn't do it by himself. She said, in effect, "You must let me help you." She must have known about the interview with Peel. I can imagine Babbage complaining about the interview with Peel to Ada, but let's face it, that conversation must have happened. But she said, "Let me do this, the actual words in my book, but let me handle all the business," I think, I'm paraphrasing here, that relates to involvement with our fellow creatures. Meaning, let me do the sort of PR for it. Let me be the manager. I mean, have we all seen the film The Social Network? Most of us probably have. Well, that's about the launch of Facebook. And a very similar story. I mean, the founder was brilliant, had a brilliant idea, but needed other people to get the investment to make it all work. Now, Babbage turned Ada down. He writes very briefly in his own handwriting that he saw Ada on, I think it was August the 15th, 1843, just before August the 15th, and refused all the conditions. So we have this terrible scene of Ada being very fond of Babbage, going to see him. He was 24 years older than her. By that time he was getting on by that point, and basically saying no to everything. So she couldn't do that. Now, I know that very likely if she tried to do it, I'm not suggesting that she would have succeeded, because I mean she had flaws herself. She could be very flighty herself. She wasn't always that consistent. I'm not suggesting that by turning her down, he made it impossible for her. I'm not suggesting that by turning her down, he stopped a 19th century computer revolution from happening. That would be too much to say. But certainly he didn't make it any more likely. And the later years of Babbage's life, we have a sense of him living among the ghosts of his dreams. There's a famous talk that Lord Bolton gave in 1914, when he was an old man, when he knew Babbage, met him in the 1860s, and the Babbage never came to fruition. I mean, basically, Babbage's name has come to fruition now because of modern people who've worked very hard to make it come true. I'm just ultimately a commentator. I'm a commentator. Writers are destined to write rather than act. That's kind of our destiny. Well, I mean, to some extent. I mean, actors as in making things happen. But she turned Babbage down. I mean, interesting enough, it didn't ruin the friendship. They still stayed friends, amazingly. I mean, he took her to the Great Exhibition in 1851. They didn't sort of fall out. I mean, they may have fallen out for a bit. There was a sort of suggestion they may have fallen out for a couple of months, but it wasn't a long-term fallout. I think the story of Ada is a story of utter fascination. And the more our age relies on computers and information technology, the more fascinating it becomes. I mean, if nothing else, we have to acknowledge that her notes make her one of the most remarkable female thinkers in the world, and indeed one of the most remarkable thinkers generally. I mean, in my book, I've told her story as well as I can. I hope that you find Ada an interesting character yourself, and even if you still think privately that she was as mad as a hatter, I hope that my talk has given you the idea that she said some things which were pretty amazing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, James. Does anybody have any questions or comments? And wait for
Can I ask, what was the actual evidence that was given that she was as mad as a hatter? Was it just something that was plucked out of the air?
Well, I mean, that's a fair question, very good question. There's no doubt that she wrote some letters under the influence of laudanum. I feel very strongly, I mean, I must be careful what I say because Bruce Colley is dead. I did very much want to ask him, as part of my research, whether he still felt the same about you, but I couldn't because he's no longer with us. There was no doubt that she wrote some letters when she was under the influence of laudanum. She also, I mean, she wrote some letters to Babbage when she talked about being his fairy. She wrote one letter which said something like, think of you dining with your companions in ease and comfort while I'm out there doing your bidding like your fairy. And that's ultimately just a sort of feminine way of behaving, I suppose, in that way. There is no evidence she was mad as a hatter, to be truthful. It's just not. I mean, again, may rest in peace. It's not actually fair of Bruce Collier to say that. I mean, when you study Ada, you actually often end up thinking maybe some of these attitudes towards her, which were visible in the 19th century, have not really eroded at all. I mean, after all, there aren't that, I mean, let's face it, there aren't that many women here, are there? Today, even now, there aren't many women. There aren't many women working in computing in I don't mean management roles, of course there are management roles, but there aren't that many women working in sort of the technological leading edge of computing. I think because they're not encouraged to do so. I think people should respect the memory of the dead. I think people should not say things about dead people that they wouldn't be prepared to say to their face if they were still alive. I do feel that.
There's something that's always puzzled me about Ada, and that is the process by which she learned about the analytical engine from Babbage. And she met in, as you say, in 1833 at the age of 17. And the notes were written in 1843 during a frantic 8-month period during which there was this frenetic exchange of things. Now, are we saying that Ada, in a period of 8 months, not only grasped the operation, function and purpose of this engine, and moreover had insights? I do accept and have argued that she had insights that went beyond Babbage's. It was she who saw the implication of the general purpose machine. But what puzzles me is we're talking about a woman and a woman who, over a period of 8 months, not only grasped the significance of the machine, but also understood its workings. I was wondering whether in your researches you found anything that sheds light on the period between 1833 and 1843 that would explain some run-up to this rather extraordinary contribution she made.
No, that is again a very important question. I mean, the preliminary thing to say, of course, is that she and Lady Byron, and I think Mary Somerville, from memory here, were present around Christmas 1834 when Babbage first mentioned this other idea for another engine. But the answer to the question is no. I mean, there isn't any. I mean, ultimately, there isn't the correspondence between 1834 and 1843. There is no evidence that she sort of was studying the machine then in detail, and Babbage was telling her great things about it. There's no evidence for that.
Which makes her contribution even more remarkable.
Yes,
if we're saying it's confined to a window of 8 months.
It does. It's not something I thought about, but you're absolutely right. It means that in that time she seems to have mastered it. I mean, looking purely on her life, she was very busy in the 1830s, mid-1830s, getting married, having children, and being a society hostess. And it's not clear that she would have had a huge amount of time to really master the Alice engine. But of course, Babbage came to visit her and her husband frequently. I mean, you can imagine having conversations about it, but I would agree that there's no evidence that the detailed technical work happened before 1843.
Just a small point, that is when Babbage rejected her proposals basically to manage and promote the machine out of hand, it was in the immediate aftermath of the big dispute about the notes when she excluded from it this his diatribe against the government.
Yes.
So it was in immediately aftermath, so he was pretty annoyed with it. He was quite put out.
Do you feel that maybe she didn't show much diplomatics? Do you think she should have perhaps written the letter at some other time, do you think? Maybe the timing wasn't very good herself?
I think it would have been out of character. I think she was very forthright.
Yes, that's probably true. Thanks.
A suggestion about the short timescale. If she had the good fortune to really understand the underlying principles very early on, then it's much easier to explain a complex piece of machinery coming down from the top and you know what it's trying to do, than if you're trying to work your way out from the bottom, looking at all of the pieces. And so there's a question there of if something sparked that key insight, then she'd be in a very strong position compared to someone who was looking at it much more mechanistically.
2 points. When you say very early on, what do you mean by very early on? I mean,
well, the argument we're having is because she did all this work in 8 months of understanding the machine and explain it and so forth. If she gets the key idea very early on,
yes, I mean, I think
that's a key that unlocks her.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. I mean, basically, as someone who's made a lot of his living from writing about technology without being a technologist, I know about that. in her 8 months, she didn't need to sort of, she probably couldn't have built an analytical engine, but she kind of understood what it was all about. And I think that's, I mean, after Babbage called her after Babbage knew her, and we didn't, called her his interpreter and interpretress. I mean, clearly that's how he saw her. But the point is that her comments about the machine are clearly, and I think Don acknowledges himself, that are clearly beyond anything Babbage told. Well, beyond anything Babbage told her. So she did bring fresh thinking to it, as well as interpreting it.
How did you personally become interested in Ada, and what persuaded you to write the book?
I'd answer that by saying how I first got interested in Babbage. I can remember peculiarly, very vividly, the first time I saw the word Babbage in print. I was on a bus from Leicester, where I used to live, to my home in Knighton in Leicester. I think it was before we moved in 1975, so we moved further up Leicester then. I was on a bus, and I was reading a book by Arthur C. Clarke called Profiles of the Future, and that mentions Babbage. It mentions Babbage as a man who was ahead of his time. And Clarke actually says Babbage did not have the precision tools industry to make his machine, which of course is not, strictly speaking, true. It was not. The problem was that he couldn't make enough cogwheels quickly and cheaply enough. And as far as Ada was concerned, she came out of my interest in Babbage. I remember reading Longitude in about 1996 or 7 in my garden in my house in Canterbury, and thinking it would be a good idea for a book about Babbage. And basically, I kind of got to know Ada through that. Of course, I think the first time I became aware of her name, in fact, this was when, was in the exhibit at the Science Museum, where I've not been there today, but where there was a section on the wall about Ada herself. So her name was first mentioned there. That was, and as far as the book was concerned, I've always wanted to write a book about Ada, just about Ada. The problem was, I'm going to tell you what happened. I did the proposal about 2009. And there was a lot of interest in publishers, but the problem was that there was a rumour that Walter Isaacson, who wrote the book about Steve Jobs, was writing a book about Ada. And so nobody would touch my project. And even now, he's not writing, he's writing a book about digital pioneers, but there's no sign of it. And then Martin Ringer, who's a rather iconoclastic publisher of a firm called Gibson Square, I was up for it, I said, look, there may be a book from America about her. He said, no, I will do it anyway. So that was, hats off to him for doing that. Any views now? I mean, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on this matter, but I'm not fishing for compliments, but I'm just asking, over the past few years, has anybody apart from myself, thought that Ada's contribution was more important than maybe they thought it was in the past? Would anybody want to talk about that at all? I just wonder if anyone wants to comment on that at all. I mean, certainly there was a sense. Sorry, this gentleman here.
Martin.
Hi. I'm Martin Campbell.
Oh, Martin, hello. Hi. Well, I'd be even more scared. I'd have gone to the bathroom twice.
There does seem to be kind of Lovelace bandwagon kind of role.
Yes, it's true.
I think what I find difficult about it is that Lovelace's life is absolutely fascinating in its own right, and she doesn't have to be a genius to make that an interesting story. One of the difficulties I have with Lovelace's projections, and it's similar with that science fiction book, The Difference Engine, is there's something of what I think Vivian Bowden calls ludicrous extrapolation, in the sense that when Lovelace is talking about the analytical engine producing music, you have a machine that can do about one edition in 15 seconds. I think the speed is at that order. So there's kind of a sizing problem that the technology to compose music on the analytical engine isn't going to arrive for a century. So in a way, what marks out a genius, I've always felt, is somebody who can project beyond into what's possible, with the current technology and thought. And Ada Lovelace is sort of so far beyond that it, in a way, devalues what she's doing. I think, in a way, Babbage was more sort of feet on the floor in that sense, that he's got a machine that will perform this valuable function, and it's the engineering is there to do it. You know, it would be possible. Whereas what Lovelace is projecting, fascinating as it is something that's really a century in the future. It's that.
But Martin, surely, sorry, doesn't that make her even more remarkable, though?
Well, it's a tough call, isn't it? I mean, an analogy would be with Arthur C. Clarke projecting stationary satellites.
Yes.
Again, you see, that sort of was on the horizon, and it is something that sort of could happen, you know, within 30 years. What she's projecting is something that's not really happened yet, actually, has it? You know, computer-generated music.
No, it's absolutely true. What you're saying is very interesting. I mean, it's interesting whether in fact she knew it was only capable of one calculation in 15 seconds. It's very interesting. But I think a point that's very worth making here is that, of course, when we look back, inevitably, we are looking back from our comfortable position where computing, probably everyone in this room has got a computer somewhere, access to a computer at home, or almost everybody has. But when she and Babbage are working, for them, it's like Isaac Newton talking about looking on the shore and seeing if picking up a few pebbles and the vast ocean of truth lay beyond you. I mean, they didn't have that. They had a glimmering, a glimpse. I mean, Babbage too, of course, of this, what it could be. I mean, after all, Babbage did talk about posterity and how he did think about posterity, didn't he? And I think what's amazing is that the industry may never have happened. Because it did happen, it's changed all of our lives. I mean, I think the computer industry makes life more interesting, provides more content and more readily accessible. It's amazing. But when they were writing, when they were working, there was nothing. There was just a blankness. In the same way that if we try to project 150 years into our future, I'm sure we all think that there'll be computers. I mean, it's the future of the world. There'll be more computers, everything. But it's still a very vague and difficult thing to predict, isn't it? I mean, who would have guessed that they would have trying to make a light bulb in 1890s would have accidentally discovered a mechanism, a far better mechanism for making the switches than cobwebs. I mean, however, you know more about this than I do, Martin, so I don't know.
Well, I suppose you might compare her with Grace Murray Hopper, for example.
Yes.
As being another kind of female icon. Who's made a fantastic contribution, but nobody would call Grace Murray Hopper a genius. You know? But you can still make a fantastic contribution. What I think it's sort of a false claim in a way to call Lovelace a genius. Her contribution was, truly fascinating. It's a fascinating story. I'm sure it will be a fascinating book. But she doesn't have to be a genius.
To be interesting, I would agree.
Yeah.
Do you not agree, though, of course, that nowadays most industries that go through a period where when they reach maturity, the big discoveries tend to be made by salaried people working for large organisations rather than inventors working in a tool shed or something. I'm not being facetious, that's kind of true. Would you not agree that's kind of a tendency? Not really? I mean, the computer industry and developing a laptop is an astonishing invention, and yet that was not kind of discovered by a team of people rather than by one person working in isolation.
Yes, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, I think
Please, Martin.
Thank you. Is she a visionary, which is perhaps just slightly lower down the pecking order than the genius?
Well, of course, this depends on what the genius actually is, and I would agree that, as I said, this was not my title. I wanted to put Ada's thinking machine. And in fact, it's kind of ironic that the first review the book's had on Amazon.com, although at the moment it's not an American edition yet, is a one-star review saying, so, is she a genius because she's a woman? Why can't women be geniuses too? So I thought that was the first review I had on Amazon.com. So,
Roger.
Yeah, Roger Johnson. The reference to music is interesting because, of course, it's intellectually only a small step from the pins of a musical box to the holes of a Jacquard loom card. And so, without wanting, it's just there was mechanical music at that time, which makes the composition possibly just slightly simpler than thinking of a sort of digitized music as we might do today. It's just an observation, but there was mechanical music at that time.
It's curious that that's not it's not something he refers to. I mean, I don't know, I'm not sure to make of that reference to music at all. It's kind of, I don't know what to make of it at all, really. I mean, it's almost like she suddenly had this sudden glimpse of something. I don't know, really. I mean, because there must have been music books, there were in the 19th century, weren't there, of course. And there were good ones as well, weren't there, as well.
Didn't Babbage loathe the music organs that
He did.
So say it again, sorry?
I think Babbage paid the organ grinders
Yes.
to go away.
That's actually quite wonderful. And in fact, when you go, there is a kind of cross connection, because when you go to Lyon and see the early looms, I think the Bouchon loom before the jacket, I'm not sure it was Bouchon, but one of the looms before, I think Bouchon actually applied the cards, but not automatically. One of the early, Vaucanson, that's it, Vaucanson's loom used a barrel with studded pins, but of course it wasn't very good because the barrel kept needing changing, whereas of course the Jacquard loom could use a chain of cards. Have you all seen that portrait of Jacquard, the woven portrait from 24,000 cards? Isn't that awesome? Isn't that just unbelievable? It's just incredible. Because Babbage, of course, ended up owning a couple, didn't he? Yeah. I think there may be some books coming. We've sort of tried to get some of the publishing. Maybe get some books. We'll see. I mean, there is, of course, Martin's quite right. There is an age of bandwagon, and clearly, as happens with people from the past, the present age makes what it chooses to make of them. Which, after all, is the present age is right, and we can't really go the way it is really. But I mean, certainly, people have made claims for Ada that I think are beyond what is actually reasonable. I mean, what do we think about this idea of calling it the world's first computer programmer? It seems to come from the Bernoulli, from the discussion in her notes of the Bernoulli numbers. I just wonder what we think about that, because she's often referred to as that. I've actually deliberately avoided using that term because I'm not sure I think it's a reasonable thing to say, but I just wonder what anyone thinks about that. Martin, yes, sorry.
That was what I most feared about your talk, so I've been very pleased that you've not fallen into the trap.
I've never been comfortable with that idea.
Well, there's quite a famous paper called, by Donald Knuth, called Babylonian Algorithms. And quite a famous historian, Mike Mahoney, sort of said of that paper, he said, well, the trouble is, interesting as the paper is, it's exactly what the Babylonians were not doing. Because they could only do what they had the intellectual infrastructure. They couldn't conceive of the idea of an abstract algorithm. And I think Wilkes, actually, Maurice Wilkes was the first person to make the remark about Babbage. He has no idea of what a program is. In the modern sense of a program being, and this is Wilkes' phrase, it's a good one, a static description of a dynamic process.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And a lot of the problem is that many people have looked at Lovelace's paper, and those things look like programs, they look like assembly language programs, and but you actually have to, when you study them, you realise that's what they're not. They're actually, the modern language would be that they're a trace. They're a description of what the machine would do if it were to, for example, solve a set of simultaneous equations or compute the Bernoulli numbers. So, for example, there's nothing like a print instruction, there is nothing like a branch instruction. In fact, they only have 4 operations: add, subtract, multiply, and divide. There's nothing else there. So it's sort of almost like the Bernoulli program in particular, it's sort of like unfolding a program loop. So, and how they would have gone from that to actually coding it as a set of cards is a very open question, and it would have been extraordinarily difficult.
So you feel that calling the world's first computer program is just not reasonable at all?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I don't think they could think in those terms. You know, that's such a modern conception, the idea of a programmer.
Has anyone noticed, if you try and modify the Wikipedia page on Ada, have anyone noticed this? Your modification will last for about 5 minutes. Do you know why this is? Because this is really corroborates what Martin said. I mean, there is a bandwagon of Ada, and they monitor that page very aggressively. I mean, I once posted on it briefly. I said it because on the Wikipedia page it takes for granted that he meant Enchantress of Number. It meant Ada by Enchantress of Number. By the way, it's Enchantress of Number, not Enchantress of Numbers anyway. I did mention that to make the tool words, but she said I went to what she said, but she didn't think it was a major problem. there is an Ada bandwagon. And in some ways, it's kind of, I mean, I think it's kind of forgivable, because there was a sense of wanting to guard a reputation, but by the same token, it almost goes too far the other direction. It makes it more difficult for reasonable, for rational debate to be taking place.
Can I close the formal part of this talk now? Thank you very much indeed, James. What can I say about Ada Lovelace? I don't want to be controversial, but it would be so interesting to hear you talk about her and for the contributions and your responses.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm sorry about disappointing Lou, but I was just really scared.
But 1843 was the year that The Economist was first published, and the News of the World. There are also, from my perspective, there are some significant legal cases which still apply today. There was a case which established insanity and criminal responsibility, and also cases on company law. And although, you know, your point about it being completely non-technological compared with what today, but Brunel was going strong with his first tunnel under the River Thames, and his SS Great Britain was launched in Bristol, and the world's first Christmas cards were sent.
Oh, really?
So that's the context. But thank you very much indeed, James, for telling us.
Thanks, Rachel. Nice to see you.